Everything is a lesson to build us up. Harm is good for us. What kept me going through all kinds of near catastrophic failures? I mean, everything from bankruptcy to almost losing my home, to being on food stamps, to being investigated by the feds.
Today, we are joined by Mr. Andrew King. He's a serial entrepreneur, fintech banker, founder of 2 record labels. He's also been a bodybuilder, a failure. I hope everybody listening is like, holy crap, man, I got no excuse.
As you go out and try to achieve difficult things and do difficult things and do things that are unorthodox, but there's no blueprint really for you to follow in some sort of prescriptive way, you have to expect that you're going to have an inordinate amount of failures travel with you on those paths. Failure rule number 1 is
Before we get into the rules of failure, why don't you tell us how you got so qualified to speak on this subject?
Sure. Yeah. So, as you kind of touched on a little bit in my bio there, I've done a number of things, everything from being, bodybuilder to being a spy novelist, owning 2 punk rock record labels, to working in the banking and finance space, online lending, financial planner. Fintech is currently what I am involved with now. So through all those years, also in the gym, through all those years of kind of entrepreneurial off-road adventuring in my 20s and my 30s, there's some things that I think I learned, right? And some of those things were around the topic of failure. As you go out and try to achieve difficult things and do difficult things and do things that are unorthodox, but there's no blueprint really for you to follow in some sort of, prescriptive way, you have to expect that you're going to have an inordinate amount of failures travel with you on those paths, right? So as I did that, I began to learn. I began to think about what I had learned. And there was a beach walk I took towards the end of 2013 where I was walking through 2 twin failures. One was a marital divorce that was forthcoming, that I knew was forthcoming. And the second was a business divorce that I just walked through with a partner in an online lending firm I was involved with that had, really kind of forced me to restructure my financial life and my life in general. And I was just reflecting on the beach, listening to punk rock the way I do. I had Motorhead and Cro-Mags, in the years, singer for Cro-Mags, John Joseph, author of PMA Effect, frequent Joe Rogan guest. He wrote the foreword to the book. And, I was also thinking about the Winston Churchill quote, that success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. And I was thinking about what kept me going through all kinds of, almost near catastrophic failures. I mean, everything from bankruptcy to almost losing my home, to being on food stamps, to being investigated by the feds, to all kinds of chaos and stuff. And what kept me going to keep doing new things and trying new things above and beyond, the necessity of providing for my family. And it was really this enthusiasm, this kind of entrepreneurial nature of me, this creative nature of me that had to always go that direction. And I decided, I was convicted really to write a book on the value of failure. I kind of just wrote down just some rough notes back then in the 7 years, multiple iterations of the draft, many life changes throughout that draft. And then finally, it was birthed here in 2022 after a year and a half editing or so with the Scribe Media team. And that's kind of how the book came about. And as I was writing it, from draft to draft, it really just revealed itself to me, almost like invoked by the muse. I mean, like the structure revealed itself. And these 5 rules started like revealing themselves in terms of bunching up the different chapters and how they rolled up to a specific kind of overarching theme or rule. And then there was kind of sub lessons for each chapter that connected to that rule and was anchored by a quote from a virtual mentor. So that's kind of the genesis of how the book came about and a little bit of my background.
Yeah, so I appreciate that you've given me no shortage of avenues to pursue with that answer. It's like 100 things to double click in everything you just said. So I'm going to start with, I'm a big fan of puns and wordplay. So I'm going to start with the pun that jumped out at me, which is that as a bodybuilder, we get well acquainted with failure. In fact, it's the only way we grow, right?
That's right.
And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that part of your life. How early did you get into the gym and into that pain threshold, that pain growth threshold physically, and how much of that has been formative to the way you do everything else?
Oh, 100%, right? It's just the idea of, sense gratification delay, the idea that before stabilization, before optimization, usually first comes pain, and that's usually evoked by discipline. So, I mean, as early as like age 16, when I first started going to the gym, it was mostly inspired by being picked on as a young punk rocker before I had any size. Back when being a punk rocker wasn't freaking cool. You know, it was before it was like, you know, in advertisements and selling paraphernalia at the mall. Like back then, like you actually got your ass beat for being a little different, right? Or for being into some sort of subculture like that. And so I started to go to the gym at around that time. And it was something that really gave me, you know, not only the physical strength, but the confidence and the cognitive abilities were increased. And it just became a part of my life ever since, you know, and then even traveling into when I actually did my bodybuilding. So I just graduated college with an English degree after dropping out of student teaching, deciding that kind of structured path wasn't going to work for me. So the world was wide open. I didn't really know what I was going to do with an English degree because obviously it's so vague. I mean, I spent most of the time studying everything from Alfred Hitchcock seminars to lesbian poetry. And so I'm working at this steel plant, learning Spanglish, and learning kind of compassion and understanding for the life of the oft overlooked working poor. It was a really big growth period in my life. And it was then that I decided to just go for another goal. And so I always wanted to be at least do one bodybuilding show. And that's all I did. And I trained for a natural bodybuilding show. And just the process alone of conditioning my body, adhering to the diet, getting a trainer, you know, being on my feet all day, 8 hours at the steel plant, 2 hours at the gym, a couple hours a night on the bike or the skateboard, you know, whatever, just always on my feet. I ended up writing at that time lots of journal entries about the experience and the spoken word events around that time too. And just, I was also going through like, you know, kind of the coming of age stuff with a relationship. I was with a woman who was a heroin addict, relapsed on heroin. And so kind of that relationship breaking up kind of gave me the motivation to channel my aggression into my goals and the bodybuilding and all of that. So I think just the idea of channeling angst, pain, you know, kind of the monster within and integrating it into some sort of pursuit in order to, you know, channel that into high positive impact in the world was really ingrained in me at a young age. And a lot of that came from punk rock too, from listening to hardcore punk rock, specifically East Coast hardcore, where it was less of the nihilism influence of the West Coast punk rock and more of this hard East Coast kind of searching for higher meaning, not just identifying the problem, but trying to come up with a solution through the music and through the messages, through the culture as well.
So where do you think you got this, call it anti-establishment streak, which for the record, I would say, although you may be one of a handful of musicians and perhaps the only punk rocker I've had on the show, this anti-establishment streak is highly consistent. It's not just a punk rock thing. It's honestly an entrepreneur thing, right?
Amen.
Where do you think that came from for you?
I just, from the youngest age, I just had this kind of like, I talk about an internal spirit voice and this kind of like ethereal notion of what it means to really, you know, block out the external world and hear what, you know, what your internal voice is telling you when you're not thinking about external influences. And from the youngest age, I heard that, man. I had a strong sense of identity. I knew, like, when I was 12 years old, seeing people that were covered in tattoos, I knew I'd be covered in tattoos someday, long before they were even really a thing, you know. And I just, you know, from the earliest age was into like rock and roll. And once I, like 7th, 8th grade, when I heard, you know, Sex Pistols, Black Flag, Murphy's Law, agnostic front bands like that, it just spoke to me so deeply and so richly that I just knew, like, this is going to be the soundtrack to my life. I'm 49 years old, still is, right? I've released over 120 records between my 2 record labels. It's a big part of my life. Even now as a fintech banker, when I'm buttoned up and I'm about to go on a presentation with 100 executives, like, I'm listening to songs by the band Madball before I go on, just to get that animation fueled in me, you know? So even as I kind of like traverse into and adapt into like more of a formal corporate world, I still have this spirit within me that's animated.
So how did you make the leap then? If I'm following the chronology, you had, you know, college, you know, English major, working in a steel mill, into the punk rock scene. Like, none of this is terribly auspicious from a prognostication of future success standpoint. You know, so I say that with nothing but respect, of course. So how did you make that leap to going, okay, I'm gonna get into business and then I'm actually gonna be successful at it?
Well, obviously, there's plenty of failures that punctuated the successes, hence the book, Failure Rules, right? Which, side note, this book would not have been written if I hadn't read Choose Yourself by James Altucher, which I know you're a friend of his.
Yeah. Love James.
That book, along with Srinivas Rao's The Art of Being Unmistakable, who's now kind of coaching me in the book world. If I hadn't read those two books, this book would not have been written. So his book was just huge impact on me. Stylistically, just in terms of giving me kind of the inspiration to, mine and excavate my own story.
But he's failed probably as much as you have too.
Yes.
I love James.
4 zeros on the end. So
yeah, right.
yeah. So, so in terms of the chronology of the path, right, I think really I would not have gotten to business if it wasn't for punk rock. I graduated college, and there was a time where I was, after the steel plant, I had worked with juvenile delinquents, helped counsel them out of, after they got out of lockup, and integrate back into the community. Did that for about a year, was kind of the meaning pursuit, but I knew I had to marry meaning with money, which is a big theme of the book, the challenge of marrying meaning with money. And I was engaged to be married, ended up getting a job as, working collections for Ford Credit. And I was just writhing in my seat, just low-level tasks was not working for me. Tucking my shirt in every day and just being a mindless automaton was not working for me. And I needed to do something to kind of move into a realm of passion. And I was writing for music magazines on the side, making no money. So I decided to shadow a guy who had a record label. And at one inflection point, I got laid off from my job right as I got married. So it was like a pink slip right when I got home from the honeymoon. And I was delivering pizzas, collecting unemployment, and just decided to max out my credit cards for thousands and thousands of dollars and go sign a classic hardcore band from New York, this band Breakdown, and started my record labels. And from there, the tumult began, right? So I talk about a calling journey in the book, how when one's really aligning with their calling journey, that oftentimes it means you will have higher meaning. It's a space of higher meaning, but you'll also encounter a bumpy ride which will be filled with tumult and mystery, as well as the thrill and the joy of the ride, right? So that's when the tumult began. I just kept going down that road, ended up getting a paid education in the music industry, kind of providentially, ended up meeting the VP of this metal grindcore record label in Philadelphia, Relapse Records. Met him at the gym one night, serendipitously, and ended up getting a job there a few weeks later. And that was kind of my paid education in the music industry. By day, I was learning the music industry, getting contacts, learning the business. At night, working till about 2, 3 in the morning, running my record labels. I did that for about 4 years, stopped taking a cent before the record label started hitting some success, signing bands like Madball and Blood for Blood, kind of global bands with a following. And that's kind of where that began. And then I hit some turbulence a couple of years in after I went full time with my record labels and quit working for others. Had an office in downtown Toledo, Ohio. And it was around that time that the transition from the physical delivery model of music was really rapidly shifting into digitization. And at the time, nobody really anticipated such a quick shift. A retail landscape started crumbling. I was getting returns from many of the retailers. 25% of my sales was Tower Records. They went under. That really impacted me. I was overextended on some big releases, and a couple didn't do well. And I hit this inflection point where I was over leveraged, and I had to really just kind of put the operation on ice and lay off all the staff and allow it to recoup. And I had to go find another career. And that's when I got into finance and banking. But then all the while, I kept the record labels in the background. They ended up recouping. And long-term, the IP rights, have value now of the catalog, particularly with the exponential nature of streaming and how that's really, the dominant format at this point.
Man, so interesting. Again, so much to unpack there. I love that term, a calling journey. Obviously the theme of this show, Unlock Your Potential, my book, really my life's work is about helping people unlock their potential. And I think if I were going to sum up what it looks like, I mean, you nailed it. Like there's nothing I'm going to say, or there's no insight or tactic or revelation that's going to unlock a person's potential. All of a person's potential is bound up inside their calling. No, I mean, maybe this is a truism. I don't know. I'm making it up as I speak, but I don't think you can unlock your full potential until you're in alignment with your calling.
100%.
And so, I think one of the greatest tragedies in life, and ultimately, as much as anything, why this show exists, is to try to figure out why those few people who don't fall prey to this tragedy, why they don't. And that tragedy is simply to not heed that calling, to not listen to that voice, to allow fear or judgment or embarrassment or self-doubt or whatever it is to stop a person from indulging that voice that I believe every one of us is imbued with. So in terms of your story, where I really want to probe is like, okay, you were married. Was your wife a protagonist or an antagonist in this calling journey at that time?
Well, let me first, if I could level set. You've been married once, twice? You're in third?
Three times I'm 80.
Okay, so I'm currently going through my second divorce, which is a very pleasant one, actually. Still very good best friends with my soon-to-be second ex-wife. But my first ex-wife, not so much. So that one she was definitely the antagonist in many ways towards the end, and in some ways understandable. A lot of people are not built for going along for this kind of ride, right? I mean, entrepreneurs are a different breed. You add the creative element, you add the subculture elements that I was interested in, and it's even more of a rare breed, right? So probably more of an antagonist in that sense. But you're right. I think about this idea of a calling journey. I'll read you the definition from my book, because I have the definition of terms in the book. Some of these terms I probably invented, right? So calling journey is defined as, it's used as a key concept within the text. It refers to a calling of one's life that is plural, multifaceted, and not dependent on singular outcome, purpose, or manifestation. A calling journey refers to the totality of one's tapestry of purposes that are uniquely presented to everyone to appropriate or not, based on how they utilize their free will and obey or ignore the promptings of their internal spirit voice. Mm-hmm. So it goes back to that voice. And so the book is very much about these three terms: being an authentic, internal spirit voice, and calling journey. And so it's this idea that to truly be authentic, you must have enough surplus of solitude in your life and the ability to hear the true whisperings and promptings of your internal spirit voice. Then you need to have the audacity to kind of go against a safety file culture. Failure rule number 2 is nothing is safe. And you have to be able to go after those promptings, even when you don't know what the end result is. But you know that at each step you must take it, or likely you will be off path. And like, Henry David Thoreau, famously said, you're then at risk of living a life of quiet desperation, and it's to avoid that feeling. I mean, Stephen Pressfield talked about this too, that when those that avoid that calling, avoid that tug, that pull, that they often manifest sickness, even if they have the externals all in line, a nice house, nice wife, nice car, all that stuff. But if they're not chasing after something that they're supposed to chase after and manifest with their unique talent stack, they're often manifesting physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological sickness in some way, shape, or form. And looking through my life, even with the external failures and hardships, I never had that, man. I had the enthusiasm, I had the integrity. I knew I was going down the right path, even when it had like huge boulders in front of me. I mean, it's the Ryan Holiday thing. It's the obstacle's the way. It's, what obstructs the way is the way, and I knew that even through that. And that's hard to convince a spouse of, right? When you go back to that question about protagonist versus antagonist. Mm-hmm. That was a little bit of a tangent there, but it gives you a flavor of, kind of the key concepts of the book.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love where this is going. And this idea of ignoring the call versus heeding the call. First of all, I want to remind everyone that the root of ignore and the root of ignorant are the same thing, that there's a willfulness to being ignorant of your own potential that simply comes from choosing to ignore that which would lead you in that direction. And so you're not a victim. The fact that you haven't taken that step because of perhaps justifiable circumstances doesn't make you a victim. It just makes you a person that shows the illusion of security, in one way, shape, or form. I love that you said nothing is safe. I would actually argue that in the modern world, there's a paradox at play, which is that which seems the safest is the riskiest. And I would say that if we were to plot society on a bell curve and say the big fat middle, who is, running the plays that they were probably told to when they were a kid, go to school, get a job, borrow the money, work for the pension, climb the ladder, do the thing, 2.2 kids. And this isn't to, pick on anybody's lifestyle choices, but like if you play it safe, you guarantee disappointment. I believe that to my core. And I have enough empirical, I don't know if I'd call it empirical evidence, but I don't find exceptions to that rule. The people, I've done 240 episodes of this show with people that have superlative, outlier, extraordinary lives that have highest highs and lowest of lows.
Yep.
And not a damn one of them ever played it safe.
That's right.
And I could go to the grocery store and find you 50 miserable people that'll tell you that the road to their disappointment was paved with the perception of safety. And I think there's a lot, there's a lot to that. Like I actually think that's like axiomatic in the world today. And that, I don't know. So I guess I'll ask you, was there someone when you said you always had a really strong sense of identity, and that you kind of knew you were maybe, let's call it different.
Yeah.
Was there someone that modeled for you that was okay? Like, it seems like most people aren't quite okay with who they really probably are if they let themselves express it. And why were you?
I think you're right. And I think there's probably two things that kind of converged for me to kind of solidify that. One, again, it's steeped in my attraction and just affinity for punk rock culture and the punk rock ethos, which was rooted in authentic individuality. And so, as a 15-year-old kid reading books by Henry Rollins, I was able to see the world through a very different lens. I write about Henry in the book as well, his journey through singing through Black Flag, where he quit his so-called safe job at the ice cream shop to jump in a van and embrace punk rock poverty and go on his journey where he's now who he is, a renowned speaker, actor, author, musician, all of that. But, they're the type of people that I was attracted to even pre-internet, when it was harder to even find those people or get information like that, right? That coupled with a deep sense of spirituality, was probably around that time also that paradoxically, I also kind of came to faith, in an unorthodox or, not going to church and all that stuff, but a deep relationship with God. And so that kind of vertical kind of communication channel, along with the horizontal virtual mentors that I selected over time that spoke to me, that just built up the scaffolding in me that just made me very, very strong over the years. And the book really is, it's a symbol of that. I mean, the book layers in all kinds of wide variety of case studies, and they're all people that really didn't play it safe. They didn't always play it stupid. They had strategy. They had plans. Like, you still need to make a plan. You still need to try to go as safe as possible, even when you're going down an unsafe route, right? Like, you got to put your helmet on before you go for that bumpy ride. So, I mean, it's everybody from legendary boxer Jack Johnson to author Stephanie Land, who wrote The Maid, which is a Netflix show was made out of. I do case study on Captain Tony Terracino, who was the mayor of Key West for a while. Gene Simmons from Kiss, Stephen Pressfield, ex-gang leader Elgin James, who happens to be the half-brother of Jocko Willink, professional 10-pin bowler Thomas Smallwood. So a wide cross-section of people that have stories that somehow map to or are similar to either my stories or ethos that inform my stories and the narrative of my life.
Okay, so I'm so glad you brought up faith. I want to sort of lean into this and connect a couple themes of what you said. So you also said earlier, and I don't remember the exact words you used, but it was something to the effect of, to really heed the calling, somebody has to have, and forgive me, I don't remember your exact words, but it was effectively like a critical mass of solitude in their life. There has to be enough stillness that they can hear the voice. What was your word for it?
Surplus of solitude, actually. Yeah.
Surplus of solitude. Okay. So we're sort of piecing these things together because, again, like, ultimately this show, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about that person who's listening.
That's right.
Who's got that voice and who's looking for that spark. And maybe they need to create some more stillness or some more solitude in their life, or maybe they need to block out that one negative influence that's constantly in their ear, or maybe they need to see themselves a different way, whatever it is. That's the person that we're really trying to reach here. And so I'm curious if you can talk about faith, because the thing I love about faith, and I'm a faith-based person, is that faith is a risk inversion. Like when you have faith in something supernatural or eternal or, beyond this terrestrial corporeal existence, the greater risk becomes being of this world.
Amen. 100%. If you're turning off that channel, if you're changing that channel that gives you access to the metaphysical, access to that mysterious voice that maybe only you can interpret it in the way that you can, for the way that you need to, at a certain inflection point in your life, if you turn that channel off because of the noise of the world, the noise of others' opinions, the noise of the culture, the noise of safety messaging that bombards you, the noise of distraction messaging that, comes and grips you. If you turn off that one channel, you're going to be misaligned and you're going to fall into that realm of discontent. You're going to fall into that realm of high anxiety because you're without even knowing it, putting all your faith and your attachment into things that are going to shift and crumble, right? And so if you recognize that things will shift and crumble, you actually can find the beauty and joy in that if your attachment is internal and eternal, right? If you have a vertical communication priority that informs your horizontal, enablement and application of your life and your pursuits.
Yeah, I love, and again, it's, this show it began as a research project, right? I'm just trying to find like, what are those common threads of these, outlier successes in different aspects of life. And this really seems to be one. I've basically decided like, if you don't have some sort of faith in something, then it's sort of logically hard for me to imagine how you could be an individual, like a truly authentic individual, without being a raging narcissist. Because if your only foundation for individualism is yourself, that seems like a slippery slope down a hole that I don't want to go down. But if your foundation for individualism is to be in this world but not of this world, and to, what I say, since you died to the rules of this world, why as though you still since you died to, it's Colossians 2:20, since you died to the, I'm blanking out, why as if you still belong to this world do you submit to its rules? Mm-hmm. Right? Like if you're either going to be of this world and play by this world's rules, or you're going to invest in the idea that, by the way, the simple notion that we have a calling is faith.
Yeah, it's metaphysical.
Or else called by whom or by what, right?
You, right. Yes.
Just like your own echo. I mean, that's back to that narcissism thing, right? Like your calling isn't your own voice bouncing back to you, right?
That's right.
So, okay. So let's hop back on the chronology train here. From punk rock to fintech, or to banking and finance and fintech. By the way, it occurs to me there's kind of a, if you can't beat them, join them aspect to that. From the counterculture to the engine of culture, right? So talk to me about that leap, and then what was that like to find yourself a punk rocker in finance?
It was very difficult. I felt like I was living a bit of a dual life for a while, but I found ways to integrate it, and instead of seeing it as a replacement of my old identity, I saw it as an expansion of my existing identity, and I found ways to be my authentic self in a new space, with a new, manifestation of myself. And again, so I still approach things with this punk rock ethos, right? Which to me, there's a straight through line, straight from punk rock to entrepreneurialism, to faith, right on to even, kind of a small L libertarian philosophy. And so those things all thread right through to me, right? Like I don't see much of the difference between, like all those things connect to me.
swap out punk rock for jazz, which is very punk-esque in a way.
Yeah.
And that's basically my through line too. I would completely agree with you with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So like those things all connect to me, right? Because it's all about, I mean, punk rock ethos, DIY, do it yourself. That's very much akin to entrepreneurialism. That's very much like, you don't rely on larger structures unless you absolutely have to. That's very much a libertarian ethos. To do all that, it's kind of hard to do that without some sort of faith, some sort of deeper calling, something beyond this world. I don't care whether it's the framework of Christianity, which I rely on, or whether it's even a non-faith tradition like Stoicism, or whether it's my Hare Krishna friends, John Joseph or Raghunath Kapo. I learn a lot from them, from the Eastern ideas, wherever it comes from. The people that I know and kind of admire, they have something deeper than this world, or something philosophical or spiritual, driving them and informing them to help them, like Churchill said, move from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. That's the engine. That's the endorphin of the spirit, right? Because there's something driving you beyond just the attainment of ease and comfort, the attainment of a safe ride.
So there's two things I want to point out. You've used this term numerous times, enthusiasm. I'm a big fan, and I think of myself as a fairly enthusiastic person. And for anybody that doesn't know and isn't catching the connection, the word enthusiasm comes from the Greek of to be possessed by a god or by an animating spirit, in theos in us, right? And enthusiasm, I believe, is directly derivative of faith in that sense. But there's something else you said that I really want to, I just want to lock in on this. And again, I'd like to have you restate it because I don't remember your exact words, but it was basically, don't rely on large institutional structures unless, I guess, even for a time you temporarily have to, but even then, try to get out of that time as fast as possible. Is that equivalently what you said?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I even read a chapter about this, right? So this was a chapter that it pained me to write because it pained me to recall the memory of having to go through this. So there was a few times throughout my journey, gained it all, lost it all, gained it all, lost it all. And in the valleys of those, there were times where everything got burned off and there was no other, branch to hang on to. And I succumbed to having to accept, public assistance several times. So I go into depth in a chapter called The Necessity of Shame. And it's called Necessity of Shame, subtitle, Food Stamps Suck and Gratitude Rules. And that's the name of the chapter. And I go through it. I make references to Roger Red, the singer of the punk band Agnostic Front, who grew up on welfare, but then also was popular for singing a song, pretty much eviscerating those who abuse the welfare system, just delineating between a hand up and a hand out. I talk about Stephanie Land, author of The Maid, and her journey going on food stamps. And I talk about my own and how painful it was to literally be, it was during the crisis of 2008, the financial crisis of 2008. And I was just recovering from turbulence in my record labels, still, had to go out and kill what I eat, couldn't find a job with a salary, built a financial planning practice for a couple of years, but it was just starting to get going. It takes years to really build, stability there. I was in the Midwest, so in the auto belt, Toledo, Ohio, half hour from Detroit, very dependent on the auto belt. And a lot of my clients were Jeep workers. And during that crisis, accounts were being closed. Sales cycles got long. Commissions weren't happening. I was working harder than ever all day, all night, and nothing was really happening. And I succumbed into that state. And it was a really regretful thing, but it was that shame that motivated me. It was the shame of being on it that motivated me to get off of it and really actually wrought me more character than I could even imagine over time. It's this idea that, while sometimes we might have to rely on structures, we should never over-rely on structures. We should never aim to rely on structures. We should be striving for independence within reason. Doesn't mean you don't collaborate, coordinate. Doesn't mean you don't have any sort of corporate involvement in the world. That's not what I'm talking about. But generally, I think we're designed to try to maximize our own potential for our own integrity, and then as an outpouring of that for the blessing of those around us. And it's that type of work ethic, animating spirit that drives me.
Yeah, one of the strongest principles that I've sort of taken on in my life, and I learned it in therapy. I learned it from my psychologist, is dependency breeds hostility. This is like a deep truth in behavioral psychology, right? That like the longer you're dependent on something, the more you develop an oppositional relationship with that thing. Whether it's, think about even like Al-Anon, like codependence in addiction relationships, right? And how angry they end up being at their partner because of their dependency on the substance, and then their dependency on the partner and on the substance. And like I just believe that to my core. Dependency breeds hostility. And obviously you invert that and say, okay, so independence reduces hostility. I think that one of the reasons we live in such a hostile, aggressive culture right now is because we've basically bought into the 20th century narrative. And it really is the prevailing narrative of the 20th century, that like your entire life is going to be this construct of large institutions. They educate you, they employ you, they finance you, they build your spec home, they immunize your kids, they tell you how to raise your kids, they tax you. I mean, whatever. To a certain degree, like, I get it. Like you said, collaboration is necessary, but
yes,
more than, I can't think of a time, based on what I know of human history, when people have been more voluntarily submissive to large structures. There may have been times when it was involuntary, like, oh my God, the Roman Empire just invaded.
Sure.
But now it's like what everybody seems to want is just like, take care of me, please.
And it's a position of weakness that breeds more weakness. And there's nothing wrong with having the gratitude of being a receiver of gifts, a receiver of help. But if that's not coupled with also an unbridled tenacity to get to a position where you don't need to receive anything anymore, then you are going to have a problem. You are going to have a problem with your own happiness, with building those necessary, muscles of self-reliance that bring wholeness and happiness over time.
I'm going to go a little further at risk of being unkind. You're not only going to have a problem, like you are a problem.
For sure.
You're everybody else's problem, right? I mean, these structures, it's kind of like when they talk about government governing by consent of the people. These structures that are, to your point, are extremely important as an acute option for remediation. Somebody's in a spot and they need a Band-Aid, or they need a bridge. They need a cushion. Okay, great. That thing should exist by the contribution of the people. Not, there can't be 10 billion of us draining the thing and 100 million of us funding the thing. That needs to be inverted at every moment. And sadly, it's not in the world today. And I think that ideologically, you're either with us or you're against us on this.
Yeah, and the inversion needs to be more look like the intent, which is the structures are controlled, limited, and owned by the people, not the people controlled, limited, and owned, and hoarded over to by the growing Leviathan structure. It needs to be inverted the other way. The structure can still exist, auto exist, has a purpose, but it needs to be tilted the other way, and that's the problem.
So talk to me about kind of where you are now in your life, relative to the calling journey. How is the calling evolved, and where do you feel like you are in, call it the cycle of, suffering and renewal? Like, do you think you're out of it? And how, if so, how has that evolved your calling and where you are in your life today?
That's a great question. I like that you use the dichotomy there of suffering and renewal, because that is really kind of the main recurring theme in failure rules. The idea that you're constantly dying to something to be rebirthed to something else. Failure rule number one is failure purifies. It's the idea that the phoenix must burn to emerge, that oftentimes our failures, we need to decouple, kind of our emotional self from those events, see them through an objective lens, and realize that oftentimes those failures are a blessing, even if we didn't want them to happen, even if they could have been avoided, because they're often burning off bad thinking, burning off faulty foundations. And we need to seek to find out what is the best way to renew and rebuild. And I think that's a constant, cycle of life. So I don't think I'm ever really going to be done with that cycle of suffering and renewing and suffering and renewing, because each time that cycle replays itself, I grow. It's like Nassim Taleb in his book, Anti-Fragile, like from failure, from hardships, I don't just get up because I'm resilient. It's greater than resilience, excuse my language, because you actually exponentially grow like a hydra because of them. That it's like weightlifting. Like you grow because of the harm, not in spite of the harm. You just get up, right? You don't just restore, you grow. And I think, I'm never going to be done with that. I think I'm always being refined. I mean, even in this season of my life right now, to be very open, I'm going through this second divorce. And a friend of mine said to me, he's like, you probably shouldn't get married again. I'm like, why do you say that? I just keep getting better at it. I was really good at it this time. And even the divorce is, kind of full of reason and love and friendship, even if regrettable, right? So like everything is a lesson to build us up. Our harm is good for us, most harm. Not that there isn't some senseless tragedy and senseless harm in the world. I mean, I'm not dismissing that. That's obvious, right? But much of the things that happen to us that we perceive immediately as negative, over the long tail, if we're wise and we apply ourselves, respond to it correctly, is actually for us, not to us.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's coming up for me, and I will just share, man to man, I'm on my third marriage, and it's incredible, and it's totally my soulmate, and it's the one that, we're gonna die together. I'm confident of it. But yeah, I had to get through that second one to get to that third. So for whatever that's worth.
Yes.
But I also, what you're really bringing up for me is perspective. It's the meaning that we attach to things. The word suffer, which is also the Latin root of the word passion. The word passion comes from the Latin passio, which means to suffer. Hence the passion of the Christ, the suffering of the Christ, right? But even that word suffer means to bear the weight from underneath, subferere, to like ferrous iron, right? That it's literally the lifting of weight from underneath. And so the reason I say that is, this idea of trauma, of like what really, you talk about senseless suffering. To me, senseless suffering is pain with no meaning, pain to which we're not able to ascribe any meaning, right?
Sure.
And so, but that's actually a choice.
It is a choice. I mean, if you think of Viktor Frankl, I mean, that's the quintessential narrative that
totally. It doesn't get more
that's a choice, right?
Senseless than that, and yet look at the meaning he was able to extract from that. Yeah,
I mean, so the act that perpetrated the suffering wasn't senseless, but I do believe, like you're saying, that even in the midst of a senseless tragedy or horrific failure experience or act, that if you have the wisdom, and I believe spiritually inspired, otherworldly wisdom, you can find deep meaning in whatever the scenario or suffering is, and extract out of that something that you can put back into the world that's going to be good and be edifying.
Yeah, I deeply believe that, and even this idea of trauma, we've gotten really steeped in trauma, right, in the world today, which, by the way, is probably legitimate, but trauma. I have a friend who's a former Navy SEAL, and now he does a lot of he had to overcome a lot of his own stuff from being in the service, and now he does trauma work with CEOs where he helps them deal with their personal trauma, because very often what he finds is that it unlocks the growth of their business if they can get their personal stuff out of the way, right? But anyway, he talks. I've talked to him at length about what trauma really is, and trauma is essentially your subconscious mind sort of freaking out, for lack of a better word, over what it perceives as a loss of control. And so trauma is not actually an event. Trauma is a state in reaction to an event where you keep replaying for yourself the loss of control that event triggered for you. And so the reason I'm saying all this is, as soon as you start to believe that trauma or pain or suffering or hardship or whatever label you want to put on it, that it is designed to unlock the next level of your growth, then not only does it give it some sort of a meaning, but it also reduces this idea of like, oh, I'm no longer in control of my life,
Right.
because you realize this is exactly what I need to get control of my life to get to the next level.
That's right.
And it actually ceases to become trauma at that point.
No, I mean, exactly. I mean, I talk about, leveraging chaos as an idea engine in the book. When chaos comes at you, that you have a choice. You can stand there and get hit by it. You can view it as nothing but a threat, or you can step back and say, all right, how can I use this chaos as an energy entering my life and find a way to steer it to reshape myself into that next wider, better, more acute, precise version of myself that the world needs. And that's the idea. And whether that chaos takes the shape of tragedy or failure or whatever it is, it's that idea. I mean, and like you said, I think that trauma, oftentimes you use the word steeped. And I think that is a key word there, because people get steeped in trauma now. They get steeped in analyzing the trauma and they stay there because it's a psychological reverberation in their mind that they never dealt with. They never found the skills, the mindset, to view it as something that they can tame, that they can channel, that they can use it to reconstruct something good out of. Because that skill is not taught, because it's difficult, because it's not always, because it's not clear even how to do it. The book studies people who've done that, right? So the guy that wrote the foreword, John Joseph, he was a singer for the legendary hardcore band Chromax. He's a triathlete. He's Hare Krishna devotee. He's written multiple books, including The PMA Effect. PMA means positive mental attitude. He wrote the foreword, and his story is he was conceived by rape. He was then put into foster homes throughout his life. Mentally, physically, sexually abused, homelessness, drug addiction, was locked up in jail, all kinds of trauma. And yet this is the most positive man I know. He's taken all of that, turned that around into the most extreme, extraordinary creativity and good that he's put out into the world. So it's those type of people that I look up to and I think ought to be the template, for us at large.
Yeah, it's just incredible. I mean, this is what this show has revealed for me. I mean, the last episode I did of this show is with a guy that was an enforcer in a gang as a kid, and ended up leaving gang life and founding a company that he sold for $800 million, and now he's building AI. Now he's trying to create AI that's capable of winning a Nobel Prize. Like, I mean, this is a gang enforcer. This is some kid that the world had written off, right? I mean, it's, again, I hope everybody listening is like, holy crap, man. Like, I got no excuse. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what this is. I got no excuse. So to kind of bring it home, I know we're about out of time. I sort of got half your answer to my last question about where you are in the current cycle of your journey, right? And what do you think, what is the calling journey telling you right now is your next phase?
It's a good question. So I'm focusing on, I feel like I'm right in the spot that I need to be, that I'm accurately listening to my internal spirit voice. I'm still performing very well at my day job as an executive fintech banker, finding a lot of joy and pleasure in that, working kind of in an innovation type product development lab where working with a lot of the big kind of fintech companies, kind of the Chime, PayPals of the world, helping them find ways to move money faster and quicker and neater and all of that type of stuff. And that, which I call my thing one, my enabler pursuit, both informs, builds me up from a skill standpoint, and also finances my thing two pursuit. My thing two pursuit is the North Star dream. And that's failure rule number 4 is build your thing one and thing two dependency. So I'm living that thing one and thing two dependency in a very strong, real way. That job has enabled me, informed me, and financed me to put out failure rules, to hire Scribe Media, who's done books for David Goggins, James Altucher, and Seem to Lead, to get this book out of the world in a very professional way, to help me with publicity. And I'm building a multi-year plan to really get this message out to the world. For me, that is my calling right now. I don't know what the next step on that is, but right now I'm just trying to evangelize failure wisdom to as many as possible. So I'm going to continue the podcast tour until that's exhausted. Then I'm going to start my own podcast next year. I started a merchandise company, Soul and Fire Supply Company, to go along with the book and echo the themes of the book. So promoting that, and want to do speaking and any other way that I can get this message out there. And so to me, this is my deep calling. It gives me the most meaning right now, but it's informed by all the other scaffolding in my life, right? And it ties together all these disparate interests and experiences. I mean, connecting punk rock to bodybuilding to fintech to writing spy novel to, all these different things. It still falls under this umbrella. And so, and plus my love for cigars. So there's a lot of cigar culture stuff going on in the book. I'm friends with a lot of some cigar personalities and does some stuff in that space as well. So to me, that is my calling right now. It's just evangelizing this message so that people like your listeners can hear these type of stories and get inspiration from them and some wisdom and kind of build that, that internal strength to be able to hear that internal spirit voice and align with their calling journeys.
I love that you use that term enabler pursuit. I think that a lot of times, like any, call it subculture, there can be a tendency for ego to bleed into the identity within a subculture. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurial subculture has a lot of ego-based shaming or disdain for the idea of a day job or a more mainstream career. But I love the way you describe it. No, that's my enabler pursuit, right? That enables my dream, right? And I want to, sorry, go ahead.
No, I cut you off. I apologize. Keep going, Jeff. Sorry.
Well, I just want to give, the audience that perspective of it's, there's a lot of mythology around burning all your boats.
Yes. Yeah.
But you can burn, there's different types of boats, and there are some types of boats which are worrying what other people are going to think, listening to people's advice who don't embody the actual life or outcome that you desire. There's a number of things like that I would describe. Those are boats you should incinerate.
Sure.
But cutting off your money flow when you haven't funded your dream yet, don't burn that boat. That's just dumb.
And it goes back to nothing is safe. Because nothing is safe, your dream's not safe either. You don't always want to burn all the boats around it. You actually want to build some boats around it so you can more safely enable that dream. So I go through examples in the books of very creative thing one and thing two dependencies, where one example were these two brothers. I anonymize them in the book. They came from Lebanon. They came over to the U.S. And for them, building their own businesses, retail stores or retail businesses, that was their dream. They didn't have the seed money. So what did they do? They went and worked for Disney on Ice, and they worked the merch truck for several years. They had no home. Disney on Ice paid for their lodging and their food. They were able to save up their entire earnings for several years. They use that creative thing one enabler to then go seed their retail empire. Now they own gas stations, they own gyms, they own cigar lounges, they own nightclubs, all in this one city. And it all came from that very sacrificial, visionary thing one enabler pursuit. You have to do that. You can't, you don't always have to do that, but it's very difficult to go straight after your dream. You need some scaffolding, some structure around it to make your dream more probable that you can actually reach it. And it has to be a long game quite often. You can't just, give up after a year or 2 years. Yeah, sometimes there'd be, fits of starts and stops, and you have to return to it. I mean, Failure Rules, there's about a year and a half where I didn't write it all on the book, but it was always in my mind, and I knew I'd come back to it. It was just kind of like ruminating and maturing in my mind. Came back to it, finally came to fruition. And you have to have that long game. You have to have a wide view. You have to think about all the inputs and all the ways that the tapestry of your life might end up somehow converging to serve your dream.
Well, you said it took you 7 years to write Failure Rules.
Yeah.
My book took me just shy of 5. And there was about a 2-year period when I didn't lift a finger for it. Yeah. What's funny too is I'm curious if you experienced anything like this. For me, the draft, when somebody holds my book in their hands, it's 137,000 words. Every one of those words was written in 120 days. But that 120 days had 4.5 years that preceded it of fits and starts and writing and tearing up and second guessing and beating myself up and going back to the drawing board. And so it just takes what it takes. And that's a book, but that's true of anything of meaning.
It's analogous to building a business. It's analogous to, other creative pursuits. I mean, if you're working a job and you're trying to become a comedian on the side, or you're working a job and you're building an app, or you're working a job, but your true dream is to own a gym, whatever it is, like, it takes that long view. It takes that patience. It takes that returning to it, even when you're tired, even when it feels like there's no momentum, and you still just have to keep chipping away, looking for that micro momentum to focus on and to accelerate. It takes a lot of working in secret. It takes a lot of working without external encouragement. It takes all of those things. It's hard to do that without this strong internal locus of control and some sort of, spiritual undergirding that drives you and is connected to some larger calling along your calling journey.
Internal locus of control. Man, if you hadn't said that with only 30 seconds left in our interview, we would park on that for a while. That is everything. That internal orientation, that internal compass magnet. Okay, so listen, I unfortunately we're like about out of time. So I'm gonna end with a couple things. One, how can the world go get more Andrew King goodness? Obviously the book. Tell me more. Where else can they find you?
Sure. So hold the book up again. Failure Rules: The 5 Rules of Failure for Entrepreneurs, Creatives, and Authentics. My name is Andrew Thorp King. No E on the end of Thorp. Go to andrewthorpking.com. Again, no E on the end of Thorp. From there, you get a free Failure Rules mini course delivered to your inbox if you sign up for the email list. You can also get connected to me on Instagram, where I'm most active, my YouTube channel with some great videos produced to animate themes of the book. Also, there's a soundtrack for Failure Rules. You can find it on Spotify and Apple Music. My merch company, Soul on Fire Supply Company. Some kick-ass designs you can get through the website as well. And you can find the book anywhere you consume books online. Great audio book by the actor Jay Aseng from the show Twin Peaks on Showtime. Did a great job with a really urgent cadence, really did justice to the text.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Lots of great stuff to explore. Final question. Share with us one of your undiscovered or not well-known sources of wisdom, something that you go to that not a lot of other people do, that fills your cup.
Unknown and unexpected.
It could be music, it could be people, it could be some author not a lot of people know of. Just anything that you have found inspiration from that's not the David Goggins or the Jocko Willink or the Gary Vee or the go-to for everybody else.
Sure. So for me, recently, even though I'm a Christian, I've been getting a lot of wisdom from my friend Raghunath Kapo, who runs the Wisdom of the Sages podcast. He's a Hare Krishna devotee. I'm able to extract a lot of wisdom out of his messages on just listening to your internal attachments and delineating between the external world and the internal world. That's really been very informative for me. Even though, again, it's not my same faith, it actually does kind of bolster my ideas of my own faith and how it informs me. So I would say that Wisdom of the Sages podcast has been a real blessing to me lately.
Thank you. I'm glad I asked. I've not heard of it. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, he's great. Raghunath Kapo. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, Andrew, this has just been such a pleasure, man. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And to all you viewers and listeners out there, I tell you this every time. You're the best part of the show. You're why I do what I do every single time. So glad we got to spend this time together. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
Only one person out of billions could be number one at anything. The important thing is not being number one. The important thing is improvement. There's some set of things that you should learn where you can essentially what I call skip the line so that you could be in the top, 1 to 5% of your field.